everyone. I'm Stephen W. Long, and this is The Writing Life. And just for a minute before we get started, I wanted to say something. I'm who you get to see, or have to see, maybe. But there's a lot of folks here that maybe don't get the credit they should. And so first I want to say thanks to McMinnville Community Media for the great studio and letting us do this. But mostly Caroline O'Brien, who really does all the work and somehow manages to get one awesome guest after the other. Today is no exception. Ben Gorman is with us today, and just so happy to have you. Hi,
Thank
Ben.
you for having me.
This is
going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. So Ben has lots of hats, I think, if I can say that. Maybe primarily a high school teacher.
Yeah.
Certainly an author with 3 books. An entrepreneur, which we didn't get to mention, but
right.
And that's Not a Pipe.
Not a Pipe Publishing, my wife and I.
Okay, so we're going to get into that. I'm so interested, first off, and really this is about writing, so we're going to get there, but I want to ask you about your students, because I think there may be some kind of a prevalent notion that high school kids sort of don't care about stuff, and they're on their phone and video games, and that's kind of the beginning and the end. I suspect you have a different view.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, our students now, if you drive by your local skate park, you will see high school students who are practicing some trick over and over and over and over to perfect it. And we have this tendency to drive by and say, see, they're wasting their time. These kids just want to skateboard. They don't want to do anything that's productive or useful.
Right.
What they're doing is they've chosen something they're passionate about, and they are honing this skill. This discipline is transferable. If we could say to kids, hey, here is this other way to take this work ethic that you have
right.
and find a different passion, then those, that kind of passion that our kids have is absolutely present. Our kids can be very, very focused. One of the things we do have to watch out for is the way that screens have changed their brains.
Okay.
And so our kids, very much like adults, myself included, have a predilection towards addiction to screens.
Right.
And we do have to watch out that all of this passion doesn't get directed exclusively at video games, phones, that kind of thing. And so in the same way that adults are trying to learn to set boundaries and kind of, perform life hacks to say, how am I going to not, get to the point where I'm uncomfortable having a meal and a conversation with somebody without getting out my phone,
right.
That's going to be even harder for our kids who've grown up with those phones for a larger portion of their lives.
Sure.
But it's not because our kids don't have passion or drive. I have students who are interested in writing and are more driven than anybody I knew when I was in school.
Oh,
They
great.
are writing, and they're writing in different ways. They're writing on Wattpad. They're writing on, they're blogging. They've found other avenues, but they are interested in honing their craft. They're, coming. I see them at writing conferences,
Yeah.
and they're in high school. When I was in high school, I was hammering away at a early computer, and I wasn't attending writing conferences or reading books about
Right.
writing. So our kids are really impressive to me. I see what these kids are doing, what they're interested in becoming, and it gives me a lot of hope.
Well, I had hoped that you'd say that, and I kind of thought that you would, but I'm glad. So, and just to touch on it, you talked about the kids writing and writing on a different instrument maybe. What about reading? And the reason that I ask is I have grandchildren who are voracious readers and have tablets, have that kind of stuff, but read books. They don't like to read on the device.
Yeah, and I think some of that is, I think we're starting to learn that there is something different about reading on paper.
Yeah.
And we're starting to understand, one of the big differences is when you're thinking about a book, if I said to you, where was that quote that you just came up with? Part of what your brain would do is right away you would place it geographically. You'd say, it was about halfway through the book and about a quarter of the way down
Right.
the page, and I think it was on this side.
Right.
And when we take that away from people and we just give them the tablet, recall is harder. Like, part of what we do when we read a book is we place all the
Isn't that
information in
interesting?
space. Yeah. And so that's particularly relevant with like textbooks. If you hand somebody an e-textbook, they will not learn as much because they're not able to try and think back where in the book was that piece of information. So there is absolutely a place for an e-reader. It's wonderful to be able to go on vacation and take 100 books with you and say, I didn't like that one, but I'm not stuck with one. I've got 10 other books with me. I mean, that's great. But there is certainly a place for print. And so, we've kind of gone out of our way to make sure all of our books are available in print in as many places as possible. We're big fans of small bookstores. We want our books to be in small bookstores.
Yay, 3rd Street.
Yes. But getting our books out there to people in print, that's when people form a stronger attachment to a book too. There's something visceral about saying, I felt that paper in my hand, that really is hard to quantify, but it matters.
My 11 and 13-year-olds have talked about the smell of paper.
Right.
Or the smell of ink, maybe it is. But, and I'm so gratified to see that.
Yeah. My son prefers to read on paper. He likes his books, He, loves to watch video on his phone, but if especially it's a longer work, he would much rather have a book.
Sure. I was going to delay this, but we've talked about your business a little bit. Kind of flesh that out.
Yeah, so my wife and I started a small publishing company, and the way this came about relates directly to my first novel. So I'd written, I think 7 novels before my first one was ready, before I was really ready, and I'm, was sending it out to agents and that kind of thing, and getting really positive feedback. But they were saying, this is very niche. This is not going to be, this is religious satire. This is not going to be at Walmart. This is a comedy that has to do with world religions. It might be a little touchy for folks. And so they were saying this belongs.
You say Terry Pratchett.
Right.
Okay.
And so they were saying this belongs at a small press, which is, was good advice. Or you should self-publish this, and then if it catches on, then the Big Five will look into it. And so my wife and I were thinking about it, and she was really very encouraging and said, this book is so good, you have to get this out into the world. So we said, okay, we're going to try the self-publishing thing. This was earlier on in the days of self-publishing, and this world has changed very quickly. And so this was only 2013, but even then there was still some kind of lingering stigma around self-publishing. Oh, it's vanity.
Right.
And so we said, well, if
you don't hear that term much anymore.
Oh no, now it's actually, if you call something, if you say to somebody who is self-published that it's vanity publishing, Twitter and Facebook will descend on you, because there are so many great examples of works that are really wonderful that did start off as self-published, and now you're going to see The Martian in the movie theater, self-published. So like the market has just changed. The Big Five now use self-published works as their slush pile. So instead of paying somebody to go through and read books, they say, well, was it self-published? How many copies did it sell? Well, then maybe that's when we'll pick up. So it's really changed the market.
And I don't know about all of them, but is it Simon & Schuster has Archway?
Yes.
And so a division of a major publisher is for self-publishing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and the Big Five are fighting against Amazon, and Amazon is trying to kind of corner that market with CreateSpace. And so there's a lot of tension there around self-publishing, but self-publishing has been legitimized. Back when we started, we said, you know what, if we're going to self-publish, we want an imprint. We want this to look legitimate. We want a bookstore to feel comfortable with it. And a lot of bookstores will say, self-published, we're not really sure about the quality, we're not even going to take a look at it. So we said, okay, we'll start a company. And starting a company in Oregon is very easy. You pay a $60 fee and you register and you have a business.
Okay.
So at the time, I would joke with people that we were the smallest publishing company in the world because we had one book. Well, then when my next one was coming out, we said, no, we really want to turn this into a going enterprise. We're going to go out and we're going to get, find some other authors and really take everything that I learned from publishing the first, all the mistakes that I made. I mean, I made all the mistakes. I didn't have a pre-release phase. I didn't. A lot of the advertising, you kind of experiment with. Okay, does this actually get to people? No, I just threw this money away and nobody saw it. Does this one get to people? Yes, this one really works. So all that, if I could take all those things that I learned and help these other authors and save them the time and trouble, then that was something. And if we could bring some really good books to market, one of the things that gives me a lot of joy is seeing our authors really excited about what's, this book is getting into people's hands. So we said, okay, we're going to make this a real company, and we went out and made a nice website, said, okay, we're open for submissions. And we got
Look out.
a ton.
Yeah.
And so we've learned we really had to limit. Yeah, it's not a pipe publishing, that's us. And so we learned we really had to limit our scope, because if we said we're just looking for good books, there are a lot of good books that are not in genres that we enjoy reading, and we
Right.
would just get overwhelmed. So we said, let's limit ourselves to what we enjoy the most. My wife likes paranormal. We both like young adult. I like sci-fi. We both like fantasy. And so we said, okay, we're gonna take YA, paranormal, adult, and adult and YA, and then sci-fi, fantasy, paranormal.
Okay.
And kind of limit ourselves in that way. And we have received these amazing
Good.
books. I mean, we just connected with these wonderful authors. And then at the time, we heard about this author, Camilla Shamsi, who challenged the publishing industry to say, for 1 year, what if we only published women?
Ah.
And we were, you know, when she proposed it, she knew full well, like, no company's going to say, hey, Stephen King, we know we could make millions of dollars
Right.
from your book, but we're just not going to, sorry.
Grisham,
Right.
so, yeah.
So the big companies weren't going to take this on, but it was a really good way for us to say, this is something that's important to us. These are our values. We want to be the kind of company that is becoming more inclusive and welcoming more people, especially into genre literature, which historically has said, sorry, you know, it's all white men.
Right.
And so we, you know, made this big announcement back in 2015, I believe, saying, yeah, 2018, year of publishing women, that's all we're going to do. And that was a really great move for us, because a lot of wonderful authors saw us and said, men and women, said, that's
Right.
a company I want to work for, I
Right.
want to work with. So they reached out to us. And so this year, we are putting out 8 novels and an anthology all in 1 year, which is way more than normal, but it's because the wonderful writers had these great books, and we said we really want to connect with them. And so we've kind of exploded from a company with, let's see, we had 5 books before this year, and we will have 14, you know, on the other
Oh
end
my
of it. So
gosh.
yeah, we're really moving very quickly, and that's been great. It's kind of put us on the map.
I guess. Now, before we move on, just not a pipe.
So it's a reference to
Yeah.
the Magritte painting. So the painter Magritte has this painting that is a pipe, and it says in French, "This is not a pipe," and it's the concept that it's representational. It's a painting. It's not a pipe. So
Oh, I see.
yeah, it's clever. So because we only publish fiction. You know, everything we do is representational. You know, none of these
Right.
people in my books ever existed, and yet we're talking about something deeper. And so that was kind of a fun way to. Also, my wife and I are both philosophy majors, so you know, we studied our Foucault, and that's how we had contact with Magritte's
Yeah.
work, and we were like, that is fun for us. It was kind of this fun gag.
Yeah.
So that appealed to us, and it's really neat whenever we're out, you know, doing a book signing or whatever, we'll get like maybe one person a day will come by and go,
gets it?
it's the painting, I get that,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
I get that reference, because, you know, they're an art history major. And so that's a fun little connection. But that's the origin of that one, is that these books are all fiction. None of them they are representations.
Yeah. My reference would be a map is not the territory it represents.
Exactly.
That
exactly.
sort of thing.
Yes. So
Okay.
yes, a map is not the United States.
Right, it's a map. It's not a pipe. We got to talk about the books, but just a little first. Your grandfather served in Vietnam?
No, my father
Your
served in the
father,
Air
okay.
Force during Vietnam, but he.
And I'm glad, because I felt so old when I thought it was your grandfather.
Yeah, no.
but- Okay.
No, my dad served during Vietnam, but he didn't have to go to Vietnam,
Okay.
which was a very close thing. He served in the Air Force, and his platoon almost went, like, to the night before they were going to leave.
Right.
And then they found out word, okay, no, you guys aren't going over. But his job in the Air Force he had a couple of jobs, and this is kind of funny. I didn't know this. I knew he was a weather observer, and when I was a kid, he would he'd always be telling these stories. His job was to be up in the tower saying, yes, you can fly.
Okay.
And so it's not even weather prediction. It's just kind of looking at the clouds and the wind conditions and tracking all this stuff and saying, yeah, with these wind
Bob
conditions,
Dylan.
you can fly, right? His other job was he taught English to Vietnamese officers.
Ah.
And I'm sure he told me that at some point, but I hadn't caught it. And so when I started teaching English to second language learners at the high school level, and so I'm teaching, ESL, And my dad went, oh, I did ESL. And I was like, how did I grow up in the same house as an ESL teacher and never know that he had this work? And he said, well, it's a little different in the Air Force because you can assign homework and they have to do it. You're their officer and it's an order. So it's a different world.
You are fluent, I think.
Yes,
right?
I'm fluent in Spanish. So that has been very, very helpful. It opens a lot of doors. And that's because my folks recognized that knowing a second language was important. So when we lived in San Diego, they sent my brother and I to immersion magnet schools. So I would get 1 hour of English a day, and all my other subjects I learned in Spanish. So I'm fluent in Spanish, which has been really great, and it surprises people because my parents don't speak Spanish. My dad actually speaks pretty good French and then has learned Arabic. My dad's just good at languages. But we would go to Spanish-speaking countries and people would hear my brother and I and then look to my parents and my parents would go, we don't know what they're talking about. But yeah, Joe and I both became fluent, which has been a great gift.
Okay. Moving on from there, I think your dad coming back from the military service took a little bit of a different turn?
He did. So my parents were both pastors. They're retired now. They were both Presbyterian ministers. But before my dad did that, he went and got his master's in theater. And he was going to be a theater teacher and director. And then while he was doing that, my mom got her call to this very small church in southern Michigan, and that's where I was born.
Okay.
And so we were living in this tiny town, and my dad was getting his master's, and then while he was there, he felt his call, and so he ended up going back. So my mom was a pastor first, which is really cool. I'm very proud of the fact that my mom became a pastor really early on in women becoming pastors in the Presbyterian Church. She was a real pioneer, and then my dad became a pastor, and then they were co-pastors, and so that taught me a lot about couples working together and being partners. And so now my wife and I are co-publishers, and that's important. How do we actively make sure that we are making decisions together? And so I got some good role modeling in that regard as well.
That's great. As I was reading about you, and this, a little bit of anti-war sentiment, at least, we finally come around to your book.
Yeah.
How does this influence your writing, or does it?
It does. It absolutely does. Yeah, part of a larger kind of life trajectory. So my folks, Presbyterian pastors, I mentioned, and I think this is very normal. When I found my own Christian faith became far more ardent, which often happens when people kind of first convert on their own. And then I lost my faith, which was a really painful experience. We use the phrase losing our faith for a reason. It's a loss. And so that was really difficult for me. And one of the things that I wanted to do was take that difficult experience and turn it into something that could at least be positive in the world. And so I wrote a comedy about that pain, which I think makes for a bittersweet book. Like, there are parts in this novel where I read them, and I've spoken to readers who said, oh, that part was so funny. And I'm saying, really, when I read that part, it's still deeply personal and painful to me, but I tried to make it funny. So I took that experience and wrote this comedy about, what if there were somebody in our world who was dealing with not a crisis of faith. He is cursed, and he's got to drink coffee, meet with God, and drink coffee with God once a week, and hear God complain about all the other gods of all the other religions.
That's wonderful.
And so it's my wife always says, when you describe it, you make it sound so heavy. It's really funny. So yeah, it's designed to be filled with a lot of gags. Jesus is trying to decide whether or not to divorce the goddess of the church, and so that's his, kind of central arc. And God is trying to decide whether or not, his wife Frigga of the Norse mythology wants him to retire, and so she's pressuring him to retire and let some other god take over. Yes, exactly. And so the whole plot is, who's going to be in charge at the next board meeting of all the gods in Valhalla, and Yahweh is trying to maintain control. So it's fun.
Oh, that's terrific. And I was going to say, I think with any artistic endeavor, certainly with literature, you do it, you create it, and you send it out into the world, and it's kind of not yours anymore.
Right.
And I've used this example before, but a friend of mine, in fact, I think that the title of the book was Blue Rodeo, which then became a made-for-TV movie. And my friend was giving a talk someplace, and it was over, and she had questions from the audience, and somebody in the audience said, you know, I love the part where he's walking through the fair and takes the big hammer and hits the mallet and hits the pad, and the thing goes up and rings the bell, because that symbolizes, and later on the author said to herself, I thought he just hit the
Right.
pad. You know,
it's not what it meant to me.
She didn't
Right.
think that at all. And so we put these things out. Well, in my book, somebody asked me later, did you have a difficult relationship with your father? Well, no, but you know,
But
they get what they get.
Exactly. I talk with the students about how it's a negotiation, and so in the same way that you know, I'm real active in my union, and we sit down with the school district and we have a negotiation where we say, this is what we think the contract should mean, and this is what it should say, and they say, this is what we think it should say. And in the same way, there's a negotiation going on between the author and the reader, where I'm saying, here is the text of the language. That's all I can provide you. What do you think this means? And they get to decide. And I don't get to tell them, nope, that's not what it meant. I'm not there anymore.
Right.
You know? And so we have this negotiated meaning. And I can make the best offer that I can to the reader. This is what I want to give you the best. Here's the best package I can give you. And then the reader gets to say, yes, that's something that is satisfying to me. And they may read into that text some different meaning than I intended. But I hope that they read that and then say, and it's valuable to me. This is an offer I accept.
Whatever they come up with.
Right.
So, Ben, as you were saying that, and I was thinking, so the best offer. And we're kind of talking about clarity or interpretation. Would you ever intentionally offer something that maybe isn't clear?
Yes, I think, but yes, but it would be, I think my goal would be to be clearly unclear.
Okay.
In the sense that if I want it to be mysterious, I want the reader to understand that it's supposed to be mysterious.
Okay.
So I wouldn't write something where I'm saying, this is gibberish. You know, I would say, if I'm going to do that, if I'm going to go to the trouble, it should read as crafted mystery.
Okay.
Where I'm letting the reader know they're with me on this. Now that's an artistic choice. I'm not saying that there aren't authors out there who are saying, very intentionally they want to put something forward and leave it,
Right.
ambiguous. I think that's a justifiable choice, but that's not my style.
That's a different thing.
Yeah, I
Right.
think I went to a conference when I was writing corporate high school, and the person was talking about how I believe it might have been Eric Witchey, who, if you ever get a chance to get him, he's great. Portland author, and I think he was talking about how we want every story to have a mystery in it. And not just a mystery in the sense of, I'm not sure what's going to happen next, although that's important, but really structurally be like a mystery. There's something that is a precipitating event, and we are desiring to figure out kind of who done it throughout. And he goes through and plots out how a mystery works and shows that
Right.
any kind of traditional plot structure can also fit into that mystery structure, and that we can improve our stories by identifying what is the mystery in my story and thinking about it in that way. And that helped me. I happened to be in kind of the revision phase of writing that book, and that was really eye-opening that, I didn't realize it, but my character is trying to figure something out. What is
Okay,
it she's
okay,
trying to figure
okay.
out, and let that revelation at the end, when she figures out the big mystery, be the climax. So I think that it's fine to have things that are unknown, but I want the reader to always feel like at least it's clear to them that I worked very hard for them. I tell my students that a reader is giving you the most precious thing they possibly can, their time.
Yep.
And so I have an obligation to make them feel like it's worth it,
Yeah.
as best I can. And so, crafting, polishing, working on my craft outside of the text as well, so that when I come to that writing, I am showing, look, I worked really hard to be able to give you
Right. something
that you will enjoy. You don't want it to be so crafted that it sounds like I'm showing off what I learned. You want it to be
Right.
natural and fun, and but you want it. I use the analogy of a car with my students, where I'm saying a lot of very smart people worked very hard because they knew that somebody was going to purchase their car and then put their family in it.
Right.
And the people who are most precious to them. And so that's a lot of work. And they still want the car to be fun, and they still want the car to look cool, and they want the, all those things. But the safety features are kind of hidden in there, but you want the family to feel safe.
Yeah, yeah.
And in the same way, we want our books to show craft, even though they are, they're supposed to be entertaining, and you want your audience to laugh or cry or whatever at the right time.
Right.
But at the same time, you want them to come away saying, this person worked really hard so that I would have this experience.
You talk about that, and I remember in one of my classes, they said that the author, in the first couple of paragraphs, that's a contract with the reader.
Mm-hmm.
And the contract is, you the author, is saying, I promise you that I'm skilled enough to create this dream and bring you along with me, and I'm not going to do anything to burst that bubble.
Right.
I'm not going to author intrusion or
I'm not going to cheat you at the end.
Yeah.
No Deus Ex Machina at the end.
Exactly.
I'm not going to say, and it was all a dream.
Right, right.
I am going to get to the, try and bring you to a place where you say, I am satisfied by that ending.
Right.
And that's tough. I mean, endings are the hardest thing. When we accept submissions, I generally can figure out, okay, is this a book we want within the first about 5 pages? That's that contract
Really?
setting.
And even though you're talking about the ending?
Yeah, and then if the first 5 pages are satisfying,
Okay.
then the next thing is, but could they pull it off?
Right.
Could they satisfy with that ending? And so those are the ones where I get all the way to the end and go, oh,
darn.
This is an investment of my time, and they're just not quite there yet because wrapping it up is really, really difficult. I feel a lot of sympathy because that's hard. And I have whole novels that are in a shelf somewhere because I don't feel satisfied by the ending of my own work. I'm not going to let anybody else see it.
Yeah.
So not all books work, and you've got to be willing to say, that one just stays in the shelf. That one stays in the files. That one's not going out there to the world.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a very successful mystery writer. Her work is on the BBC. They've made a series.
Oh, yeah.
And she's just done real well. And she said, that, and this is a mystery, although you were talking about kind of anything, having that element of mystery. But she said, when we talk about red herrings and twists and turns and so on, that they need to be organic, that not just that the reader can say, well, you just threw them in there. And at the end, she says she wants the ending to be a surprise, but inevitable.
Right.
That when you look back, you go, well, of course.
Exactly right.
This
is the only way it could have been.
Right.
Jonathan Irving, this is brilliant. And I tell students that this is an option when they're trying to figure out how they're going to structure a work. Jonathan Irving, I mean, if you've ever read anything of his, I read a couple of his books. But he writes the last page first.
First, right. Yeah.
And, oh, this last page isn't great. Nope. Okay, this last page is a great last page. Now I'll write the book.
Right.
And he writes the book, and so you get to these endings, and you go, it couldn't have possibly ended any other way. Well, of course not, because he knew where he was going the whole time. But that's exactly right. You want the reader to get to that ending, even if it's tragic. Even if it's just the worst outcome you could possibly imagine, and you're not happy, you're sobbing at the end. But it's the right ending. And that's that feeling that I want the reader to have, where they get to the end and say, this is the right ending. Right. This is the way this had to go.
Sure.
And that's really important in a mystery.
Yeah.
You don't want you want to surprise them with the right ending.
Right. I saw an interview with Irving, and he said, and Stephen King is completely the opposite. So both work.
Starts on page 1, right?
Yeah, but John Irving said, writing a book without knowing the ending is like meeting your friends for lunch and going, guys, guess what happened to me on the way here, without knowing what happened on the way here.
Right.
And so he said, and now the other thing is, I saw an interview with him where he read the last several sentences of the book that he was writing. Later on, when the book was finished and I read it, it wasn't that.
Yeah,
but
once he gets there, he's willing to change it.
But you have to have a target.
He knew where he was going.
Or that's what he did.
Yeah. What I tend to do is I'll start with some idea, and I think I'm starting on page 1, and then I hit the swampy middle, and so I write the ending. And then I realize, oh, the reason I'm having a problem is because if it's going to have this ending, then this isn't the beginning after all. And so sometimes I go back, sometimes that gets cut. So the process is, more complicated because, and I want my students to realize you are not wedded to any of these pieces. You know, if you realize that's not the best beginning for the story, well, let it go. If you realize this ending is not the right ending, you've got to make the changes necessary to get there. So, yeah, I tend to, start at a place where I'm excited and try and use that energy. Okay, I'm really excited about this story, and then later, yeah, and that's not the beginning, and that often happens.
So my teacher called that throat clearing, and you write and write, and sometimes you write to find what is the beginning.
Right. Yep, then that's me, absolutely.
You think it is.
I'm trying to think if any of these started at the beginning. Well, this one I had the advantage of Shakespeare's structure, so he kind of plotted that one for me. But yeah, corporate high school didn't start where it started. Some of our gods didn't start where it started. The one I've got coming out this next year, certainly, gone backwards and added before what I thought would be the beginning, because it turned out it wasn't the beginning. So,
I've got a favor to ask. We hardly got to your books, and we're out of time.
Yeah.
Could you come back sometime?
I would love it. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was fabulous.
That was fun.
I knew it was going to be.
Yeah, it was great. That was fun.
All right, folks. Well, that's it for this time. This is The Writing Life, and I'm Stephen W. Long. I'd love to hear from you at stephenwlong.com. Send your suggestions for guests or topics or other things. And we'll just see you next time. And I hope Ben's with us again. Thanks so much.
What do you think? We done?
I don't know. You guys want to do one just with yourself without me doing the
think we're done. If they got enough. They got enough.
They got enough? Probably. Okay, sounds good.
Let's go lunch. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could use a bite too.